I'm joined today, as it says, as you see on the slide, by my colleagues Alitza and Kelly. And what's important to understand about the way that technology business research looks at the market of technology is that we look at it through the lens of each individual vendor. So we're trying to understand how different companies in the space, what their strategies are, how they performed, where they're heading next. And so to do that, we look at the companies individually. So Alitza is our lead analyst covering companies like IBM, Kyndryl, Capgemini, Atos, and then Kelly Lashiska is our lead analyst on HCL Tech, our lead on PwC, Fujitsu, and a few others. So when we're talking today, we're going to be talking from the perspective of what are the individual vendors doing in the space and how does that tell us something about the market as a whole. And I want to point out that what we're going to cover today stems from our predictions document that we released at the end of last year. And actually, it also comes from our generative AI and artificial intelligence market landscape that we published on December 1st of last year. Both of which, well, the GenAI market landscape, you have access to a spotlight report on it, and then the predictions document you have access to through the portal today, and of course they're available on our website. So what are we going to cover today? We're going to talk about services. Services is the lens that we're looking at this through, IT services, and when we talk about services, we're talking about people. Yes, we're talking about technology, but we're still talking about people, and as we've seen again and again, whoever has the best people, they tend to win. The second thing we're going to talk about, of course, is generative AI. We're a year into the hype cycle now. So we're going to talk about where are we and what do we think is coming next. And then the last thing we'll touch on is why we think regulations, and in particular governance, risk, and compliance, why those opportunities are going to be an important trend and an important opportunity, important revenue opportunity related to generative AI heading into 2024. And again, all of this is very much forward-looking. This is, again, based on our predictions document, but it is backed up by our constant ongoing research into all of these companies across the broad IT services sector we're going to talk about today, but then TBR covers the entire technology sector. So three big takeaways. This is the sort of, if you don't get anything else from this webinar, this is what you got to take away from it. Again, services equals people. It's really easy to get caught up in technology or in offerings or in capabilities. But again and again, our research has confirmed that the best managed companies are the ones that succeed and outperform their peers in the marketplace. And Alitza is going to talk a bit about that. The second point is that as we're in this now second year really of generative AI, the hurdles that were evident early on and that became, went from hurdles to challenges over the course of last year, those are still there. Even if it does seem like everyone else is doing some sort of Gen AI magic, the problems are still there. The problems are still problems, and we'll talk about that some. And then the last is around governance, risk, and compliance. As I mentioned, it's going to be a huge opportunity for the consultancies, for the IT services vendors, really for those firms that already have those skills. It'll be a huge opportunity for within the Gen AI space. So with that, let me hand it over to Alitza, and she will talk through the next part of this. Alitza?
Thank you, Patrick. Before I dive into the first topic of our predictions, I want to start off with showing you the performance of the IT services revenues. This slide is taken from our latest IT services vendor benchmark, which covers 31 of the leading IT services providers. It's a quarterly report, and we examine all the key trends and developments for those 31 vendors. So revenues that we see on this graph are based on those providers. And we're seeing that the trailing 12-month revenue growth for the 31 benchmark vendors is on a decelerating trend. We're still estimating 2023 revenues because companies are releasing right now their 4Q23 earnings in January and February. So that's why we have an estimate for 2023. But, we're pretty confident that growth for those 31 vendors will be around 3.4% year to year during 2023. And then we expect another slow, deceleration in the growth in 2024. The reason for this is that we still expect macroeconomic uncertainty to cause IT services revenue growth to decelerate. There will be pressures. when we compare growth to 2021 and 2022. We're seeing vendors continuing to experience softness in consulting after clients are taking a closer look at their digital spend and shift their focus to optimizing existing technology stacks instead of pursuing transformational workshops that are often funded by discretionary spend. On the other hand, the uncertain macroeconomic outlook has continued to fuel a new wave of outsourcing demand because buyers are now switching from innovation to business resiliency activities to be able to operate in economic turbulence. So vendors are now securing large deal wins around core IT modernization, productivity improvement, and cost optimization, and they're utilizing their managed services and cloud capabilities to address clients' needs. While managed services bookings are taking longer to convert into cash compared to consulting deals, some vendors' recent success with large deals indicate they are well positioned to address buyers' expectations. Vendors are also increasing activities in the public sector, which we're seeing right now as being more resilient to the macroeconomic challenges when we compare it to financial services and telecom and communications sectors, which multiple vendors are experiencing growth challenges in those two segments. Now, let's move to the next slide where we cover our first topic in the 2024 predictions, which is that companies with the best people will win. IT services and consulting really remain a people-centric business, as Patrick pointed out earlier, despite all the advances in automation and analytics and artificial intelligence. The vendors that are most adept at attracting and retaining good people successfully address demand, and they continue to outperform their peers. Keeping good people when the hype around GenAI suggests that many task-oriented jobs will disappear requires vendors to offer more training and new skills and to develop new career paths to be able to retain employees. So for our predictions, we shaped 3 areas: trends, drivers, and the results. So on the people topic, the trend we're seeing is that there is an increasing amount of vendors ramping up training and investing in employee retention to overcome employee attrition. While many technology companies made news by shedding headcount in 2023, most of the global systems integrators and consultancies try to keep trained and experienced talent to minimize employee attrition and to be able to defend revenue growth in 2024. And the drivers, it's really about employee attrition and generative AI. Employee attrition rates peaked in 2022. And after such a dynamic year in which technology-centric companies struggled to retain talent and they suffered record-breaking employee attrition rates, the emergence of GenAI in 2023 in every discussion fueled employee concerns around their job security, which some companies addressed with professional development and reskilling. So what's the result? Vendors' training and reskilling initiatives during 2023 will support revenue in 2024 and will be able to address demand and alleviate revenue growth pressures that are coming from external macroeconomic factors, because people are the key resource for IT service delivery. So training and reskilling is really important. And on the next slide, just want to quickly zoom in to 2 efficiency metrics: employee attrition and employee utilization, which we closely track in the IT services benchmark. Average employee attrition for the 31 vendors declined both sequentially and year to year to 16.1% in 3Q23. Attrition is getting close to the historical range in the mid-teens. Fears of a recession have slowed hiring across the broader technology industries and reducing competition for talent. However, IT services companies continue to compete and to retain talent and to gain skills in new areas such as cloud, cybersecurity, and AI. We expect the resource management investments will continue to shift from recruitment and onboarding to upskilling, reskilling, and career development in the coming quarters with the slower hiring rates. And on utilization, we're seeing employee utilization increasing year to year and remaining close to the historic average utilization rate between 79 and 80%. IT services companies are slowing down hiring activities, and on the other hand, are ramping up internal training and professional development and pursue productivity initiatives to extract more value from their existing workforces. So really the bet now is around being more efficient, being more productive, while retaining employees. Now I'd like to turn it over to Patrick for the second prediction topic, which is GenAI hype meets reality.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Elitsa. So yeah, the hype has definitely crashed right into the reality when we're talking about generative AI. And so looking at these, again, the same trends and drivers and result that the Elitsa walked through that same framework. I think a couple things I want to pull out of here. One is right in the middle when we talk about the drivers, and that's familiarity does not mean everything is easier. I think we're in a very different place than we were 1 year ago when we think about generative AI. We certainly all understand it better. We all understand better what the possibilities are, but we also understand where the challenges are, maybe better than we did when we first were talking about Gen AI about a year ago. So I think that's an important thing to understand that's driving what's happening with the hype cycle around generative AI and the adoption cycle. A second thing I would pull out is if we really are moving into a new phase, and maybe that's both silly to say, but also obvious. Maybe it's also late. Maybe we're already in that phase. But what I think is important is that in this second phase of generative AI that we're in now, the companies that invested the smartest are clearly going to benefit the most. And I don't mean the companies that were the loudest about their investments, nor the companies that were necessarily the fastest. It's really the people, the companies that invested in two critical parts: their people, as we've been talking about already quite a bit, and then their role within the ecosystem, their ability to play their role in an ecosystem around generative AI and being able to work more adeptly and smarter with their ecosystem partners. So if we dive into some of the research that we've done, this comes from our Voice of the Customer, which is actually focused on digital transformation. But as you can imagine, a lot of the flavor of generative AI has come into this now. And so we're talking about a lot of different generative AI stories and elements of generative AI that are feeding into our digital transformation, the lens that we take with digital transformation. And I want to point out on the left, you can see that 45% of the respondents say that there's going to be no change, or a combined 45% are going to say there's no change or increase in their spending in terms of, or in their investment based on a tough macroeconomic climate. While that's important, of course, the real critical one is the 28% say they're only going to continue with projects with digital transformation efforts that are already underway. And I think that's really important because it reinforces what we heard early on in the generative AI story. So maybe 9 months ago, the clients were really most comfortable working with their trusted partners. They weren't looking to go find somebody new to help them with understanding and then implementing generative AI solutions. They were looking to those trusted advisors, those trusted partners that were already in-house. And I think that's the same thing we're seeing with respect to digital transformation. I think it's a trend that I'll come back to in another way that it's important on the next slide. But I think that's something to keep in mind. And on the right side, we can see that 54% of the respondents here say that managing risk is driving their digital transformation spend. Kelly is going to talk a lot about what we're seeing around regulatory environment and governance, risk, and compliance, but that 54% number is pretty huge. It's an important indication that the enterprise buyers that are looking at digital transformation and generative AI are thinking about the risk part of it. They're thinking about the cybersecurity part of it, not just the opportunity that's going to come through cost cutting based on generative AI solutions. So then one more look at some of the survey results that we've done. On the left side, you'll see here that 71% are leaning on their technology and services providers to be flexible around pricing. This is is huge. This reflects what we've seen in talking to people across the entire ecosystem, customers and services providers, technology providers, cloud providers. Everybody is telling us that the one of the impacts of generative AI is accelerating expectations around return on investment. I'll try and say it again more slowly because I think it's a really important point. Everyone expects that generative AI is going to accelerate return on investment in the technology, in the services, in everything that generative AI touches. That expectation of a faster return on investment leads clients to say, we want more flexibility when it comes to the pricing, when it comes to how much we're having to invest in what we're having to invest in order to leverage generative AI. So I think that's a really important point out of this chart on the left. Also looking at 40% reevaluating with an eye towards savings. I mean, that's definitely a cautionary flag that clients are once again taking a look at who are they using as their trusted advisors, who are their trusted services providers, and again we're seeing that in part coming through the IT services vendors and consultancies themselves asking us how do they do better client retention, what are the tools, what are the different strategies that their peers are using to retain clients. And so I think client retention will once again become a major topic for 2024. And I think this 40% is that red flag there, or that caution flag. I shouldn't say it's a red flag, just a caution flag. On the right, what's fascinating is analytics at the top. That's a huge jump. I don't remember if it came from 5th or 6th on this list, but every single time that we have run this particular survey for our Voice of the Customer research, so this goes back 5 years now, 5 or 6 years now, cybersecurity and cloud computing were at the top of this list, and now analytics is. That clearly reflects everyone understanding how important generative AI can be. And it also reflects that generative AI, at the end of the day, is dependent on data. It's dependent on having a clean data story. It's dependent on orchestration of data. It's dependent on understanding what your data is and isn't. And so I think that's where we're seeing analytics at the top of this list. And I think it also shows that generative AI, which is on this list, but it's further down, will actually, I think, continue to be that pull-through technology. There's going to be opportunities that come about because generative AI, when deployed, can accelerate adoption of blockchain, for example. I think we'll begin to see in this year, in 2024, 2023 was all about the hype of generative AI. Part of what we're going to see in 2024 is a lot of the technologies that are listed on this list here. A lot of these technologies are going to begin to increase in importance as enterprises realize, okay, with a generative AI enabled solution, I'm now able to do more with blockchain. I'm now able to do more with IoT, with 5G, with digital twin, with all of these different technologies that have been useful but not imperative and business changing for most enterprises over the last few years. So that's where we are in generative AI. And I will say before we go to Kelly, we have got some questions rolling in already. Please keep sending the questions in. We'll be happy to address them at the end of this. And if we don't have time, then we'll certainly address them one-on-one when the webinar is over. But please feel free to send your questions in. And with that, let me pass it to Kelly.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you all for joining. This last trend that we wanted to talk to you about was focusing on, as Patrick said, the regulatory creep and the changing around governance and compliance. So the trend regulatory creep is focusing on cybersecurity, data privacy, especially with the insurgence and the increased applicability and usage of GenAI. It's definitely becoming much more of a challenge and a focus area for clients as they're looking to navigate through the changing requirements for governance and compliance risk. So the increasing regulations are pushing clients to allocate a greater portion of their budgets towards the regulation, alignment, and compliance. As Patrick has pointed out, the existing projects are kind of the focus right now for a lot of the clients, but they're still, I think, part of the reason why it's staying there is a lot. They have to ensure that they can adapt to compliance as opposed to starting a whole new thing. It's they need to make sure that they can operate what they have effectively and maintain compliance. This presents an opportunity for a lot of the vendors as they can guide their clients through the transformation projects as they're coming back to them for more consulting and information on how to better operate and align. While clients have already while the majority of clients have mostly invested and deployed their cloud, digital, and AI technologies, the changing regulations are going to require them to invest back into them and make sure that they're aligning with the changing needs. The Big Four retain deep expertise around these issues, including supply chain as an example. It definitely stands out as an area where numerous IT services providers invested in 2023, and now they're better equipped to deliver on that, on the changing needs throughout 2024. The more technology-centric firms, including Capgemini and IBM, they're also building out that supply chain knowledge, but more with a focus on orchestration and AI that can align with a variety of industries, different supply chains across industries. In the broader commercial sector, Accenture has also expanded its supply chain offerings. They're working with Blue Yonder to focus on cloud-ready solutions and work with the Blue Yonder Illuminate platform and bring in some of the industry knowledge and the AI capabilities to help with planning, order fulfillment, and delivery across supply chain networks. Supply chain resiliency, insight, and compliance is definitely going to start creating opportunities for the vendors as clients are looking to avoid disruption and make sure that they can react quickly and accurately. And then with the change in compliance, they also need to make sure that their procedures and actions will enable them to continue navigating and bring things in different regions to make sure that they're operating effectively. If we move on to the next slide, these charts are a little similar to the ones that Patrick was showing, but here on the left-hand side, you can see the main list of digital transformation objectives and basically how they were prioritized for a lot of clients. IT operations management was at the top of the list. The clients are looking to consolidate tech debt and make sure that they have efficient operations, again, focusing on making sure they can support what they have at better cost and effectively. The second main objective was around reducing business risk and addressing regulatory compliance. Reducing business risk and regulatory compliance, it actually increased in priority. Back in 2022, it was number 4, and then in 2023, it moved up to 2020. In 2023, it moved up to number 2. I think the complexity around buyers' IT systems is really pushing clients to make sure that they're addressing the risk that's coming in from using the different digital cloud platforms, as well as just the broad uses for AI is definitely opening up doors for risk. With the advent of generative AI, it's definitely going to necessitate the challenges for requiring greater compliance and pushing vendors to pushing clients to work more closely with vendors to help navigate these changes. With the increased activity around generative AI, the regulations and are definitely starting to change and more focusing on the use of how people are using the AI technologies, as well as how well they're securing their environments. While the existing regulations do address more basic concerns and applicability, I think more new and more encompassing regulations are slowly beginning to come out. Improving IT operations does remain the top initiative for most buyers, but it's shifting as the buyers, they've kind of matured within the transformation stage, and they're looking more to extract additional benefits and uses out of their assets and looking more into the product and service development. Supply chain is still in the bottom half of responses, but it will likely move up following some of these disruptions, as well as within the changing regulations. It'll push vendors or clients to work more closely with vendors and ensure that they're aligning with the new needs of their own consumers and what they need, as well as making sure that they're able to operate and fulfill their supply chain needs. But with that, I will pass it back to Patrick.
Thank you very much, Kelly. We've had some great questions rolling in. So let me go through a couple things here just to show you our research before we start tackling them. This is the broad space that we've been talking about today. The IT services vendor benchmark comes out quarterly, and you can see the vast amount of data under the column, the metrics column. And you can also see the number of vendors that we included in it. So we're covering the entire IT services space, obviously at the largest levels. And we do break it down into 4 different business lines and then the 3 different geographies. We also have, and we've been talking about it today because you saw our voice of the customer research, we also have a digital transformation portfolio that rolls out a report every single month. And you can see what's covered in here. Really important is coming up this year for the first time. Well, we have the Adobe and Salesforce report that came out the end of last year. Coming up this year for the first time will be our SAP and Oracle ecosystem report. A lot of our research now has pivoted to looking at ecosystems and how each of these individual players work within the ecosystem. What are their alliances? What drive those alliances? And what's changing? And so we're going to go into the Q&A now. I'll leave this slide up as well so you can see who it is that we actually talk to and where our research is being used the most. So we'll go through these questions as they came in. The first one was, did you identify any specific topic area where companies are more interested in applying generative AI other than personnel-related topics? So two answers to this. One, we did a webinar last week that dove into this in a lot more detail. So if you go on our website and look for the webinar from last, it must have been whatever the date was, a week ago, the 15th, I think. My colleague Boz Christoph and I did a webinar on GenAI and use cases and talked about where demand was coming from. So that's the first place to go. The short answer, though, is yes. There are basically three different tiers of use cases that we've seen around generative AI. The first, and this is coming from both speaking to the people buying and then the vendors who are providing generative AI-enabled solutions. And the three tiers are essentially anything that's relatively easy, and none of this is easy, but relatively easy. So tier one would be things like personnel, HR. Tier one would be things like sales, enablement, marketing. You can think of it as sort of anywhere that there has already been a robotic process automation solution enabled. Wherever you have RPA, you can sort of hypercharge it, or you can turbocharge it with generative AI. So that's sort of tier one. Tier two is anything that gets across the entire enterprise. So we're talking about SAP or Oracle, talking about any, Salesforce, any kind of, and maybe even bigger than that, but any kind of enterprise-wide application, any application that will be pulling from enterprise-wide data. Obviously, the bigger challenge there is you have to have your data in order for it to be useful within generative AI. So that's the second tier. Lots of pilot projects right now, not having seen yet anyone that's taken that to tremendous scale. And then the third tier is what we've heard described to us as I talk to my enterprise and it talks back to me. So we're definitely nowhere near that. But that's the I guess the long answer on that question. Another question that came in, does flexible pricing mean pricing based on measurable KPIs to show ROI, or does it mean flexible in terms of consumption, that is paying upfront, flat monthly subscription, or consumption-based pricing? So I love this question because the answer is the latter right now. Flexible pricing right now means the latter. It means terms of consumption, paying upfront, flat monthly subscription, consumption based on pricing, any kind of flexibility there. But I think the more important part is that we're going to be heading towards that pricing based on measurable KPIs, another way of saying outcomes-based pricing. And a lot of our research last fall, and in that voice of the customer that we had a couple slides out of, we heard again and again and again that clients are expecting that the transparency that will come with generative AI will necessarily lead to more outcomes-based pricing, where clients are going to expect that they're going to see more clear, measurable KPIs that show that return on investment, and that's where the pricing is going to be dictated, and that's going to make a big difference. So outcomes-based pricing has always been a challenge in the services space because it's a risk on both the client's part and it's a risk on the services provider's part. So while there have been fits and starts and while there have been use cases from time to time, it hasn't been widely adopted. We think that's gonna change, and generative AI is gonna have a hand in changing that. Another question: are there new types of KPIs used to show ROI that were not present in the past 1 to 2 years? It's a phenomenal question. I don't know. This is a great part of doing a webinar like this, is getting these kind of questions in. It's one that we will go off and take a look at. I can off the top of my head, I know who I'm going to ask. This is a great question and something that we'll definitely pursue, and maybe something we will end up doing a webinar on or a special report on. Another question that came in were the Gen AI trends seem to create demand for separate professional services for business consulting, for example, Deloitte, and IT consulting, for example, Accenture. Do you anticipate this separation may change over time? So I'll take a stab at this, and then I'll ask Alitza to weigh in. The first thing I would say is that Deloitte and Accenture are increasingly very, very similar firms. I know one is a firm and one is a company, and I understand that the business models are slightly different, but Deloitte over the years has become much more like Accenture than its big four. It's the other members of the big four. Again, fully appreciating that the corporate structure is different in one than the other. But the question really, so I guess I'm saying one thing that's important to understand is those two firms in particular are much more alike than they are different. But the question around business consulting versus IT consulting, and will that separation change over time? Yes, what I think is going to kind of force that change to happen is strategic decisions by those business consultancies. So you think the rest of the big four, McKinsey, Bain, BCG, the Alex Partners, Alvarez & Marsal, all those management consultancies, the business consultancies, making a strategic decision to focus more on the opportunities that come through staying more in that management consulting, business consulting lane, and the IT services vendors. So now we're into the Accenture plus all the India-centric vendors, plus Capgemini, plus Kyndryl, and all those, looking more at how they partner with a business consultancy to continue to drive that IT consulting. And it really is going to be more about the IT implementation, less about necessarily the IT consulting. But Alitza, do you want to weigh in on this one?
Yes. So Patrick, my opinion is that both business consulting and IT consulting will become more intertwined. They need each other. I don't see a separation in activities. On the other hand, I see a merging of activities. It's getting far complicated to split business consulting from IT consulting, because you're going to understand the business and the industry, but you're going to need to understand the technology that lays under the transformation. So in my expectation, we're going to see a merge in the coming future.
And Alitza, you're probably right. I'm going to go ahead and admit it. I think there's so many different ways to sort of slice that, and I think that's a better way to look at it. Thinking about it that way, I think I got too focused on the Accenture and Deloitte similarities. Kind of went down that rabbit hole. I think that was a much better answer, Alitza. We'll take another couple questions here while we have time. One is what are the best practices you are seeing with companies that have managed to scale Gen AI? So the challenge there is that I'm not sure anyone has taken it to scale in the way that or not enough companies have gone to scale in a way that you can draw a lot of clear best practices yet. I think there have been some one-offs. We've heard different stories, and we've heard more about the pilots and some of the use cases than anything really going to scale. But I think when we look at what are the best practices around generative AI, one of the most important ones, again, coming from our perspective of looking at the IT services vendors and consultancies, are that the ones that have been, as far as we can tell to date, most successful are the ones who have applied generative AI-enabled solutions internally and then brought those solutions to the market. So we call that customer zero. I don't think we invented that, but it's the idea that if you, some people say eat their own dog food, other people say drink their own champagne, whatever. It's taking what you're doing and applying it internally to yourself before you then bring it to the market. And I think that's probably where we're going to see the most use cases that go to scale within enterprises are things that were developed in-house. One of the big four firms has put together their own version of sort of ChatGPT that draws on all of the knowledge management assets within the firm. And based on your, the privileges that you have with respect to viewing the different pieces of knowledge management and the different data, you can essentially tap into it as a much better source of use cases, source of best practices, source of everything that the firm has done before as guidance and when you're trying to help out a client. That kind of thing is immediately applicable in so many enterprises where knowledge management is important. And if you're a sort of sprawling global enterprise, you've got knowledge management centers all over the place, and you're doing multiple different things. Being able to use a ChatGPT-like tool to enhance your knowledge management would be fantastic. So when this Big Four firm decides to roll it out as an offering to their clients, it will have already been tested internally within the firm. Kelly or Alitza, any other comment on anything you've seen going to scale with respect to generative AI?
I think you're absolutely right on the customer zero. It's something that IBM is really pursuing for multiple years. Testing not only GenAI, but historically just testing solutions and internally, and then applying them to customers. So I really think this is a good story to tell.
Kelly, anything else from your perspective on that?
No, I think you both covered it and really gave a good view of how it's moving.
Okay. Excellent. So we got one more question. I just want to say we've been trying with with the start of the new year, we've been trying to keep these webinars a little bit shorter, try to cover the ground obviously as quickly and as deeply as we can, but try to make sure that we keep them short. But please feel free to reach out to us afterwards. I should probably put on the slide here somewhere our email and all that, but reach out to us either through this platform. You can reach out to us on our website. And if you have other questions, and there are other webinars coming up, we're undoubtedly going to talk about generative AI all throughout 2024. So stay tuned for more on that. So I do want to take this last question now, and that's, can you talk to the technology stack that you see is necessitating as system integrators involved? And I think that means within generative AI. So I'll take a stab, and then I'll turn to Alitza and Kelly on this for their comments as well. I think early on, one of the things that we saw early on with respect to what was happening around generative AI was kind of a land rush to get involved with those vendors that were sort of at the very forefront of it. And while that may have been important initially to establish some credibility, I don't think it was really as important as the long-term relationships that the SIs have cultivated with, in particular, the hyperscalers, so AWS and Google and Microsoft. And I think that when we think about a technology stack, I think where I come down is that you need to have, as an SI, you need to have your more than preferred, your most favored nation kind of partners. You need to have that group of companies within your alliance ecosystem that are your first choice, and your first choice will differ than your competitors because they have either different different leadership, different capabilities, they serve a different client base. But if you've put together this is the preferred set of vendors that we work with across the ecosystem, that enables you to, first of all, avoid the fiction of vendor agnosticism. But that also enables you to say that you are bringing to the client people who are exceptionally well trained in all of in the entire technology stack. You're able to say to your client, you're bringing to the table the best possible commercial relationships between your ecosystem partners. So arguably a better price. Alitza, any other thoughts on that?
Wanted to add that it's important to understand the customer needs. So customer's choice in terms of, you're there to address the complexity and the challenges. So whatever works good for the customer is much better. So you need to provide a technology or solution that's really appropriate for the client based on their landscape and their applications and their infrastructure. So allowing to go with a partner that addresses clients' need and not necessarily offer a specific solution that comes from a specific vendor and locking in the client with that solution is important. We've seen multiple vendors, even across the stack, talking about taking a customer first approach when selecting technologies.
Yeah, really good point, Elitsa. Thank you. Kelly, any last word on this one?
No, I would just echo the partner technologies, especially around the hyperscalers. I think that's definitely important. When you look at EY, for example, and how it's approached generative AI, just like through Microsoft, I think it's definitely important to make sure that the technology is aligned and easily deployable, as you need to be able to work across the different environments.
Yeah, and thank you, Kelly. Reminds me, and one learning that we've had over the last few years around ecosystem has just been, the question of how well do your ecosystem partners sell you? How well does your hyperscaler partner? What does your hyperscaler partner say when your shared clients ask you about you, and how well have you trained your own people and their people in what it is that makes you different? That is such a key component to the whole ecosystem play, and to just put a button on it all, generative AI is 1,000% an ecosystem play. There's too much for any one company to do. End to end doesn't exist anymore. So the players who are better at that play well in the sandbox, the better you are playing in the ecosystem, the more you're going to get out of the opportunity that is generative AI.